Niantic's Pokémon Go swept nations this summer, and after playing the game extensively, I wanted to share my thoughts on a number of gameplay elements that I have found to be frustrating and unfair to players. Niantic has been working diligently to improve their game with each new update, but many aspects of their game still have a lot of room for improvement. I hope that Niantic will address these in the future if and when they get the chance. Number 1. Pokéstops. Pokéstops are in-game locations linked to real-world landmarks. Pokéstops are a nice inclusion in the game because they allow players to receive free items every 5 minutes. It is really interesting to see these kinds of connections between the digital world and the physical world, but I find that the functions and effects of Pokéstops become largely disproportionate to players solely based on where they live and the locations that they immediately have access to. The largest issue I have with Pokéstops is that they unjustly punish rural and suburban players while alternatively causing overcrowding in inappropriate urban locations. What's unfortunate about Pokéstops is that they're not equally dispersed. Urban areas are prone to having clusters of Pokéstops, while rural areas often have very few, if any at all. As a result, rural players are extremely hampered in their ability to obtain items and locate Pokémon. An issue I have with urban Pokéstops is that they have a tendency of forming clusters in historically rich areas. This might seem like a good idea because it encourages a lot of people to crowd to the same place, but as players begin to frequent the same locations regularly, the novelty wears off. The downside of Pokéstop clusters is that they cause overcrowding and encourage stationary behaviors among players in a game that's supposed to be about real-world exploration. Overall, Pokéstops are an interesting concept, but I think that their function in the game would be better implemented through different methods. If Niantic allowed players to receive free in-game items for walking, then trainers would be able to receive rewards proportionate to their effort instead of being based off of their geographical location. This would also incentivize physical activity in players while allowing them to explore wherever they choose. Pokéstops as they currently exist are flawed, and I feel that their core function could be improved even further as far as rewards are concerned. It'd be interesting if players were able to customize the items they received based on their playstyle. If a player spends more time battling Pokemon than capturing them, then they'll inevitably need more potions and revives than Pokeballs and raspberries. The opposite is also true, but as the rewards from Pokéstops currently exist, there's no way to increase the odds of receiving battling or catching related items that players need based on their playstyle. The limited amount of space in the player inventory makes managing items even more frustrating and cumbersome. I often found myself tossing dozens of Pokeballs at a time in the hopes that I would obtain Great and Ultra Balls from new Pokestops before having to toss and obtain even more Pokeballs again and again. It's a shame that the game isn't intuitive enough to make these upgrades for the player or to allow the player to rank their item preferences. The final function of Pokestops is their unique ability to host lures that will attract Pokemon to the location for 30 minutes at a time. Lures are in-game items that attract a new Pokemon every 5 minutes but can only be placed on Pokestops. They cost 100 Pokecoins and have a real-world equivalent of $1.39. Lures are restricted to being used one at a time at Pokestops, and that encourages and rewards players for crowding around Pokestop clusters. Overcrowding actually became a large enough issue in the city of Toronto at the Jack Layton Ferry Terminal that the mayor of Toronto personally contacted Niantic's CEO in order to get a number of the Pokestops removed. I think that removing Pokestops from the game and allowing players to place lures with much more freedom would be a good move for Niantic. Players would still be able to gather together to purchase and place lures, but they'd be able to gather in more appropriate locations. Allowing players to place lures more liberally would also potentially lead to greater profits for Niantic. I see it as a win-win. I've already seen a number of churches, schools, and community groups organizing Pokemon Go events to capitalize on its popularity. I think that having the freedom to place lures outside of Pokestops would create a lot of opportunities for communities to host Pokemon Go events that would create memorable experiences with players. And ultimately, I think that's what Niantic wants. 2. Eggs. Eggs are items in Pokemon Go that hatch after traveling 2, 5, or 10 kilometers. I'm very glad to see such a strong connection between the existing Pokemon lore with incentives that encourage mobile exploration among players of Pokemon Go. Unfortunately, I find that the execution of obtaining, managing, and hatching eggs are cumbersome, while the temporary egg incubators, tiered rewards, and variable rewards are highly addictive and unsatisfying. Players randomly receive eggs as rewards from Pokestops and are only able to hold 9 eggs at a time. There are 14 different Pokemon in the 2-kilometer grouping, 16 in the 10-kilometer grouping, and a whopping 40 Pokemon in the 5-kilometer grouping. And that's if you aren't including region exclusives. This means that players are required to hatch a minimum of 70 eggs before being able to hatch every obtainable Pokemon in their region. It also means that there's no maximum number of eggs required to hatch them all, because they're all random chance. Players have no control over whether they receive 2-kilometer, 5-kilometer, or 10-kilometer eggs. Players have no control over what will hatch from the egg, and players have no control over how many Pokemon candies they'll receive from the hatched egg. Eggs cannot be sorted, managed, or deleted, and they cannot be hatched without the use of in-game incubators. Players start off with one infinite-use egg incubator, but after that, they're unable to obtain any more. Regardless of whether new incubators are earned or paid for, they will break after incubating 3 eggs. Nintendo's Pokemon games allow players to carry and hatch up to 5 eggs in their party simultaneously, without the use of any incubators, temporary or otherwise. Players of Pokemon Go, however, are required to hatch eggs one at a time until they purchase additional temporary incubators for 150 Pokecoins, a real-world equivalent of over $2. It's not a lot of money per incubator, but there's potentially no end to the spending since they're all temporary items, all of which has no guarantee that you'll actually ever end up hatching the Pokemon that you want. I reached level 24 before quitting the game and making this video, and I've only ever received one 10-kilometer egg. Considering that players are required to walk a minimum of 2 kilometers in order to hatch their eggs, it would be nice if we had some control over the result. I have hatched dozens of Pokemon eggs in-game, and often received duplicates. I've actually lost count of how many Weedles I've hatched from 2-kilometer eggs, and yet I've only ever received one of each of the starter Pokemon. It would be nice if players were able to hatch at least one of each egg in an egg group before hatching duplicates. Even if every egg hatched procedurally, players would still have to walk at least 388 kilometers. It would require walking a distance greater than 9 marathons in order to hatch them all. Considering that players are required to perform physical activity in order to receive these fictitious creatures, I believe that players should have greater control over the outcome of the hatching of their eggs. Players also shouldn't have to walk so far in order to hatch every Pokemon egg currently in game, especially considering that this lengthy 388 kilometer distance is a minimum estimate that multiplies drastically when factoring in the number of eggs a player would need to hatch in order to earn enough candies to evolve their freshly hatched creatures. Each egg provides between 5 and 40 Pokemon candies, while each Pokemon requires between 12 and 400 to evolve. Pokemon Go currently fails to accurately calculate the full distance that players travel even while walking. When I cycle 6 kilometers, the game barely records 2. The GPS accurately follows my current location during the entire bike ride, and yet it doesn't count the full distance traveled, and has a speed limit on how fast players can travel while gaining kilometers. The game limits players from gaining progress on their eggs or for their buddy Pokemon while traveling over 10 kilometers an hour, but I believe that Pokemon Go needs to be much more diligent about discouraging players from playing while driving. A solution that'd be much more effective at preventing players from playing while driving would be removing the ability to gain rewards while traveling on roads. The game already has roads marked on the in-game map, so it'd be relatively easy to restrict gaining rewards while on the road. Many gyms and Pokéstops are accessible from the road, which allows players to play Pokemon Go while in the car. Increasing the speed limit and implementing road restrictions would allow players to bike comfortably while simultaneously discouraging players from driving and playing. Biking has been a staple in Pokemon games since the very beginning, and using bikes to hatch eggs has been a staple since Pokemon Gold and Silver, but unfortunately it seems that this has gone completely unaddressed by Niantic in Pokemon Go. I think that using a pedometer to count steps would have been a much safer move for Niantic. The most frustrating aspect of Pokemon eggs is that their variable rewards are not fair to players' efforts. These egg groups all have really good and really bad Pokemon. I find it frustrating that players have almost no influence or control over which Pokemon will hatch. Variable rewards based on luck often make games addicting and unsatisfying. Pokemon Go is no exception. It's really unfortunate because hatching eggs in Pokemon Go feels a lot more like the slot machine at the Celadon Game Corner than the egg hatching experience I know and love from the core Nintendo games. I've taken the time to order all of the current final evolutions of Pokemon by their egg groups. 10 kilometers are yellow, 5 kilometers are blue, and 2 kilometers are red. And as you may notice, the groups are all over the Poke radar here. Lapras, Arcanine, and Blastoise are all within the top 6, despite the fact that Lapras, Growlithe, and Squirtle all hatch from 3 different egg groups. Similarly, Jynx, Persian, and Raticate are all within the bottom 12. There's a wide variability in each egg group, and I think they should have been better organized. Here's my suggestion. 5 egg groups that are all much closer to having approximately the same number of Pokemon. I put yellow for 10 kilometers, green for 8, blue for 6, purple for 4, and red for 2. It isn't perfect, I know that, but I think that it's a step in the right direction. My hope is that these new brackets will give rewards that are much more proportionate to the distance traveled by the player. Again, it isn't perfect, but it's a lot more proportionate than the current tiers. In addition to this suggestion, I think it would have been beneficial if Niantic gave players more control over their eggs. Allow players to choose which eggs they want to pick up. Allow players to trade in 2 eggs of lesser value for 1 of higher value. Give trainers a means to earn rare eggs in-game. Let players know what is going to hatch from the egg. Any of these would be an improvement. Thematically, I also think that players should be able to have up to 5 unlimited use egg incubators. Whether bought or earned, it doesn't matter. Players of Nintendo's Pokemon have been able to hold up to 5 eggs at a time in conjunction with at least one battle-ready Pokemon. The buddy Pokemon already thematically fits this role, and I think players being able to hatch multiple eggs at a time without the fear and risk of spending money on breakable egg incubators would make walking much more fun and rewarding. 3. The buddy system. The introduction of the buddy system provided some additional relief to players by guaranteeing specific rewards for traveling specific distances. I absolutely love this feature and concept, and it's great to receive rewards for traveling with your Pokemon, but it's difficult to praise this feature when the rewards are so minimal. In order to receive a single candy from your buddy Pokemon, you have to travel 1, 3, or 5 kilometers. The travel requirements mirror those of the egg groups, with the notable exception that the starter Pokemon have been bumped up to the 3-kilometer travel distance. I think that fact alone says a lot about the unfairness of Pokemon Go. I'll admit, walking with my buddy Pokemon helped me turn my coughing into a wheezing, but I had to travel 33 kilometers to get the additional 11 candies that I needed. Despite my best efforts, I still don't have a Charizard, a Venusaur, a Kabutops, or a Dragonite in my Pokedex. And if I wanted to walk with the associated buddy Pokemon, it would take me over 900 kilometers of walking. And that's just for what I have left. Any player that has 0 candies for Charmander, Bulbasaur, Kabuto, and Dratini would have to travel over 1,600 kilometers in order to fully evolve these 4 Pokemon. Encountering, capturing, and transferring a single Dratini nets a player 4 Dratini candies and converts to an equal value of traveling 20 kilometers. The rewards for traveling with a buddy Pokemon simply aren't worth the effort required to earn them. The candies earned should be approximately 1/10 of what is required to evolve them to their final form. This would mean that traveling 5 kilometers with even the rarest of Pokemon would guarantee receiving between 5 and 13 candies depending on the partner. These numbers could certainly use some tweaking and balancing as well, but I think it's certainly a step forward from the single candy rewards that players have come to expect. Thank you so much for watching. This is part 1 of 3 of my Pokemon Go critique, and I hope to see you here next time.